Powerful indicator that predicted the GFC is now signaling a potential collapse. I'm going to explain this to you in 5 simple, fast steps. Let's go over something called repo market fails. Now, you all know what the repo market is from watching my videos. This is basically a transaction between financial institutions where one financial institution needs cash, usually overnight, 2 weeks, 30 days. They need dollar liquidity. So they'll take collateral, maybe a mortgage-backed security or a treasury, and they will pledge that into the repo market, and then they'll get the cash they need. And at the end of the term, the two counterparties will go ahead and swap back. So the one counterparty that borrowed the money, they'll give the money back plus a little bit of interest. And then the party that lent the money, they will give the collateral back to the entity that needed the cash in the first place. But what happens if one of the counterparties involved doesn't follow through with their end of the bargain? What happens if they break the contract? This would be a repo market fail. And recently, we are seeing these repo market fails spike dramatically. Just like we saw during the GFC, the repo blowup of September 2019, and the market collapse during COVID. Editor, go ahead and throw up a chart of the most recent spike in repo fails, and you'll see it's not as extreme as we saw during COVID. Also, not even close to as extreme as we saw during the GFC, and there were spikes in the interim. But there are a few reasons we should be just as worried about this most recent spike. One of the main reasons it could be different this time is the government is spending a lot less. They are still deficit spending to a great degree, but it's down a lot since 2020. And if the government deficit spends, this provides the repo market with the treasuries or the collateral it needs to function. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Let's go to the whiteboard. I'm going to explain how these repo fails can work, and it's going to illustrate the fragility of the entire system and why you should be extremely worried about this most recent spike in the repo fails. So the first step out of 5 is the government is going to issue a bond. So let's just say it's the Argentinian government. And this is a chart that I received from my good friend Jeff Snyder, who is the foremost expert on the dollar monetary system, including the repo market. So it starts with the Argentinian government. They issue a bond because they need dollars. But the repo market isn't going to accept this bond as collateral. They see it as junk collateral. So what the government does is they go to an Argentinian bank and they say, hey, we need you to get us the dollars we need. So we'll call this bank XYZ. They take the garbage collateral from the government, and then they go to a dealer bank that is within this dollar monetary system. And they say, hey, dealer bank, we need some treasuries to go into the repo market. Now, the dealer doesn't know that the bank is doing the bidding of the government. So the dealer bank says, okay, we'll take your garbage collateral and we'll find you the treasuries you need, and we'll pocket a little bit of a spread for doing the work. So the dealer bank goes to, let's say, Global Insurance Company. Now, Global Insurance Company has a lot of treasuries, but they're just sitting there on their balance sheet collecting, let's say, 50 basis points. So they want a little bit bigger yield. So they say, okay, dealer bank, we'll go ahead and lend you these treasuries for a little bit of a fee. So the dealer bank gets the treasuries, they give it to XYZ bank that's doing the bidding of the Argentinian government. XYZ bank takes the treasuries and issues them or pledges them into the repo market as collateral, the repo market actually needs. And then the repo market, a counterparty that has the cash on their balance sheet, they give it to XYZ bank, and then XYZ bank gives it to the Argentinian government. Whoa, time out. George, I kind of get what you're saying, but you're talking really fast and I'm not understanding the entire process. This seems like it's kind of a house of cards because there's one treasury that's being borrowed several times and used as collateral by someone that doesn't even own the treasury. And you would be right. So let's go through this and get into the nitty-gritty so you can understand the fragility of the system and why we should be very concerned that we see these repo market fails spike higher. So first, the government issues the garbage bond. I think most of us get that. Number two is that XYZ Bank borrows the treasuries from the dealer bank. Now keep in mind, this is a collateralized loan because the dealer bank is getting the garbage collateral or the garbage bond that the Argentinian government issued to begin with. And then what's happening is the dealer, because they might not have the treasuries, they're going and they're borrowing the treasuries from the insurance company. Now keep in mind, this is not a collateralized loan. So the dealer has the collateral, but they're borrowing the treasury from an insurance company and not giving them any collateral in return. Then step number four is XYZ Bank goes into the repo market using the rehypothecated collateral. Well, the way Jeff Snyder says this is it's a collateral multiplier, because what we can see is this collateral started with Global Insurance Company. They're the rightful owners of the treasury, but it's borrowed once, twice before it even goes into the repo market. Keep in mind, this counterparty in the repo market, they don't know that XYZ Bank borrowed it from the dealer bank, and the dealer bank borrowed it from Global Insurance Company. So you can see the systemic risk that's involved. And then, of course, step number five is the government actually gets their money. Just think if Global Insurance Company's risk management knew that to a certain degree, the chances of them getting that treasury back is predicated upon the credit worthiness of the Argentinian government. That's how insane this system gets. But also, let's notice that the only thing that we're seeing in those repo market fail numbers, editor, let's go right back to the chart to remind the audience, is what's happening between XYZ Bank and the repo market. But let's think about this. There was a repo transaction between XYZ Bank and the dealer bank. It was just collateral for collateral. It wasn't necessarily collateral for cash. So let's say we get into an environment where there's a lot of perceived counterparty risk. Well, what could happen is XYZ Bank would say, listen, we want this treasury because it's extremely valuable. And we don't want this garbage bond from the Argentinian government. So when the time comes when XYZ Bank is supposed to give the treasury back to the dealer, so the dealer can give the treasury back to Global Insurance Company, XYZ Bank could just say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not giving you the treasury back. You are stuck with this garbage collateral that dealer bank has to liquidate at any price they can get and hopefully give Global Insurance Company 100 cents on the dollar or go back into the market and buy the treasury to give back to Global Insurance Company so they don't break their end of the bargain. So just to reiterate, to make sure that we're all on the same page, if XYZ Bank doesn't give the money back to the counterparty in repo, that would be a repo fail. Or if they don't give the treasury back to the dealer bank, that would also be a repo fail, but that's one that might not show up in the charts. And it's likely there are a lot of those not showing up in the charts right now because we don't have the government deficit spending to the degree to which they were during COVID, meaning there's a lot less new treasuries going out into the system. Therefore, the collateral, the pristine collateral that is in the system is being hoarded by the counterparties, increasing the fail rate. So when we look at this type of data, we need to not only observe what the chart is showing us, but try to think through what's happening beneath the surface. And then we have to combine that with the perceived counterparty risk, because these banks are going to hoard the pristine collateral, not only if there's a shortage of that collateral, but what could create a further shortage of the collateral itself is if this multiplier right here is reduced. So right now, this treasury was lent out 2 times. So we've got a 2 times collateral multiplier. This sometimes in the repo market can be 10, 15, 20, even 30 times. That one treasury can be lent out to different counterparties. In other words, rehypothecated. So if there's a lot of perceived risk in the market, then this multiplier could go from 30 down to 10, down to 2, down to 0. If it does, there's going to be a lot less collateral in the system for these transactions. The less collateral we have, the more demand for that pristine collateral, then we see the repo fails spike. Again, what this is most likely telling us is there's not enough pristine collateral for the system to function properly, which could lead to a collapse, and or whatever the market participants are perceiving to be risky could come to fruition, which would also trigger an economic collapse. Another way to look at this is if the risk in the marketplace, the perceived risk goes up, the repo fails go up as well, the fails go up, and the dollar liquidity the financial institutions have access to goes down. If the liquidity goes down, the probability of a financial collapse or a collapse in the financial system goes up, which of course would lead to a crisis in the overall economy. Very similar to what we saw during the GFC. So the next question becomes, why are the market participants potentially seeing additional counterparty risk? And how does that play into all the other data that we have at our disposal? Well, let's think about this. The dollar spiked higher, gold spiked higher. These are 2 indications that the market is very, very apprehensive about what's happening in the global economy. Another thing, the euro-dollar future curve has inverted. We've talked about this on several videos. This is a very ominous sign, especially when you combine that with the treasury curve itself flattening. Now, it hasn't inverted yet, which would be a 90 or 100% probability that we have a recession very soon in the United States, but it's getting flatter and flatter. This is not a good signal. So you combine all these things together, the repo fails, the dollar spiking, gold spiking, euro-dollar futures curve inverting, and the treasury curve flattening, and this could be the marketplace really screaming at the participants saying, hey, there is a ton of counterparty risk. And one thing I forgot to mention are everyone's favorite derivative, CDS, or credit default swaps. When we look at the price of credit default swaps or insurance on some of the European banks, such as Credit Suisse, we see this number going parabolic as well, which would be another indicator of the perceived counterparty risk in the system. And I know a lot of you right now are probably saying, oh yeah, George, well, this is all because of Russia and Ukraine, and once they get that situation solved, then everything will be back to normal. Not so fast. We've got to remember that these indicators were flashing a code red long before the invasion of Ukraine. Just like the repo blowup we saw in 2019 preceded the recession we had during COVID. It wasn't necessarily COVID that caused the recession because the cracks in the system were there to begin with. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back. For more content that'll help you build wealth and thrive in a world of out-of-control central banks and big governments, check out this playlist right here. I will see you on the next video.